The growth in overseas trade and merchant marines resulted in the emergence of major cities such as Venice, Genoa, and Milan, but the location of Florence quickly allowed Florence to become the chief commercial leader. Towards the end of the 13th century, merchants loaned and invested money as well as acquired control from papal banking. Their newfound wealth among the prime trading ports resulted in great pleasure in material goods, and a luxurious lifestyle including time to appreciate and patronize the arts, thus altering the commercial hubs into a rich cultural center. Therefore, life developed from a painful pilgrimage to the city of God and became an opportunity to take pleasure in it. The passionate attachment that each Italian held for the city-state hindered the development of a unified state. By the 15th century, Florence, Milan, Venice, the Papal States, and the Kingdom of Naples controlled the Italian peninsula. Venice was understood as a republic, but in reality maintained an aristocratic merchant oligarchy. The renowned Medici family held power for centuries and governed Florence. The Signori Sforza family ruled Milan and other small cities in the north from 1447 to 1535, though it was named a republic. The power and authority of such Italian families resulted in the selection of Renaissance popes, based on political skills rather than religious piety. Trade opportunities led to drastic social and economic changes. Many northern Italian cities were sworn in as communes in an attempt to seek political and economic independence from local nobles. The merchant guilds who created the communes performed a variety of tasks ranging from regulation of trade to the collection of taxes and the preservation of civil order. Northern Italian feudal nobility united with the commercial elite to construct a powerful oligarchy, although family pride and rivalry kept Italian communes politically unstable. Due to heavy taxation and disenfranchisement, the popolo, or common people, used armed force and violent rebellions to conquer city governments. The popolo soon established republican governments in which political authority rested with the civilians and exercised by chosen representatives. Despite the difficult and lengthy efforts taken, civil order was not established within their cities, and soon merchant oligarchies reasserted their supremacy, sometimes taking measures that involved the condottieri, powerful military leaders, to establish order. As a result, numerous Italian cities developed into signori, where the right to rule resided in one family, hereditary power. Maintained a facade of free-willed republican government, these oligarchy regimes seldom allowed any other civilian to take part in the judicial, executive, and legislative functions other than their small class of wealthy merchants. Wealth was displayed through the building of grandeur of private palaces and public city halls, but primarily through the patronization and the glorification of the arts. Elaborate rituals and magnificent pageantry were present during any ceremony to flaunt the wealth, power, and status of a family. Eventually, later rulers adapted all these grand aspects of the Italian courts. The French invasion inaugurated a new era in European politics. Italy quickly became the focal point of international goals and the battleground of foreign armies, especially those of France and the Holy Roman Empire, in a series of conflicts called the Habsburg-Valois Wars. France relied upon the failure of Italian city-states to unite, and thus it was in a prime position for the invasion. Towards the end of the 13th century, merchants loaned and invested money as well as acquired control from papal banking. Ultimately, the profit obtained from the money exchanges poured back to Florence, strengthening the city's economic potency and placing political and cultural power in the hands of various banking families. Thus, the fundamental Florentine economic framework remained stable despite numerous financial crises that hit the prosperous city. With the coming of the Renaissance brought about a major intellectual change for the times. The concept of a Renaissance man was brought about to society. A Renaissance man, or polymath, was someone who was well educated in a variety of fields. These men sought to gain as much information in all fields of knowledge available to them. This idea of a Renaissance man embodied the concepts of the Renaissance humanists. The man was limitless in their abilities to learn. All of the nobility were expected to be a Renaissance man. Some of these greatest examples of Renaissance men during their time would be people such as Leonardo da Vinci, Machiavelli, Michelangelo, Lorenzo de' Medici, and Petrarch. There was also a great change in the learning method for the Renaissance. During the Renaissance, they no longer used the scholastic ideas, but the study of poetry, grammar, history, moral philosophy, and rhetoric. These ideas were able to spread much farther and easier with the innovation of the printing press, making literature more available and cheaper to the poorer public, allowing the lay people to become literate. Humanism included intellectual ideas as well as physical excellence. Humanism emphasized the ability for the human to learn and comprehend vast amounts of things, and human values that medieval thinkers thought were greatly tied to religion. The Renaissance was named the Rebirth. This was because of the classical ideas from ancient Greece and Rome came back into modern society. The works of ancient Greek and Roman philosophers such as Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, and Zeno from Greece, and Cicero, Lucretius, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius from Rome were greatly revived in the Renaissance and created the basic pillars of the ideas of the Renaissance. Humanism was, to some, the relearning of the ways of ancient Rome and Greece. Humanist learning found that the works of classical Greek and Roman authors basic guidelines on the perfect intellectual. Some Christians found it hard to accept total humanism, and they spun it into their own form into Christian humanism. Christian humanism mixed Christian virtues of hope, love, faith, and with humanist virtues of social patience, broad-mindedness, and calmness. Humanists would also develop the idea of virtue. Virtue was the idea that a ruler can shape the world around them according to their will. Increasingly, into the 15th century, wealthy individuals and rulers rather than corporate groups sponsored works of art. Patrician merchants, bankers, popes, and princes brought them as a way of glorifying themselves. The de' Medici family is the best example of such patronage. The de' Medici family sponsored many different artists, including Michelangelo. The Catholic Church also became patron and frequently commissioned famous works of art, such as The Last Judgment. In the early stages of the Renaissance, many powerful urban groups often flaunted their wealth by commissioning works of art in the early Italian Renaissance. Florentine cloth merchants delegated Brunelleschi to building the dome on the cathedral in Florence, called the Duomo, and later commissioned Ghiberti to designing the bronze doors of the adjacent baptistry. Patron involvement varied between patrons. Some only wanted a scene or a subject, while others oversaw the entire project. Commissioned works of art changed from religious and family-oriented into classical motifs and individual portraits. Artwork also showed humans in a more realistic style. Therefore, the Renaissance artists created a deliberately unique personality. Renaissance artwork transcended traditions, rules, and theories. Some of the major visionaries for the Renaissance artworks were Giotto, a Florentine painter, led the way to the use of realism, particularly in the human body and face. Piero della Francesca and Adrian Mantegna pioneered perspective in painting and linear representation of distance and space on a flat surface. Donatello, who revived classical figures, balance, and self-awareness. Titian was one of the major developers of Mannerism. Mannerism is an artistic technique in which artists will distort figure and heighten color to express emotion and drama more intently. Brunelleschi relied on inspiration from the past. He designed buildings with a sense of balance and harmony. Roger van der Weyden and Jan van Eyck were Flemish painters. They were the first artists to successfully use oil-based paints. They were also one of the first few famous non-Italian painters of the time. Unlike many other predominant Renaissance artists, Da Vinci relied on art in order to enhance and explain his understandings of the human body. In fact, Many historians argue that Da Vinci was more of an inventor and scientist than an artist. Raphael emphasized orderly sequence of design and proportion. Although Renaissance culture greatly affected the upper classes, the Renaissance failed to majorly affect the culture of villages and the lives of peasants. The medieval social structure was divided into those who fought, those who prayed, and those who worked. But the Renaissance began to change the social hierarchy. People began to divide themselves based on education. The new social categories allowed for families' social status to rise and fall within a generation. Although new hierarchies had been formed, the old order continued to hold more power and allow the nobles to keep their power and wealth, as well as gain a higher status. Another forming hierarchy was the idea of race. During the Renaissance, race was based on skin color rather than nationality. Most of the Africans were concentrated in the Iberian Peninsula. By the mid-16th century, 3% of the Iberian Peninsula's population was African. Africans were also viewed as exotic by Europeans and therefore were not only used for labor, but also for entertainment. In comparison, gender hierarchy was considered the most natural. Misogynists critiqued women and described them as demanding, devious, and domineering. Misogynists also believed that the virtuous women were symbolized by snails or turtles. Christine de Pigalle defended women and spent an extra amount of time exploring the reason behind women's secondary status and why men dominated philosophy, statesmanship, and poetry. The gender hierarchy also led to debates about female rulers. Interestingly enough, that there was never a rebellion against a female ruler due to her gender. Many historians believe that this was because female rulers, such as Queen Elizabeth, emphasized masculine qualities such as physical bravery, stamina, wisdom, and a sense of duty. The High Middle Ages witnessed the origins of basic intuitions of the modern state, such as sheriffs, inquisites, and juries. However, during the period of the 100 Years' War, the centerpiece of maintaining centralized power, the monarchies, became weak and unable to prevent against violence. Unruly nobles and rowdy crowds, in the beginning of the 15th century, rulers started to utilize aggressive methods to rebuild their monarchies. The Black Death and the 100 Years' War left France struggling politically, socially, and economically. Therefore, Charles VII gained the throne and helped to revive the monarchy. Charles VII reconciled with the Burgundians and Armagnacs, thereby stopping the civil war that had raged for 30 years. He also reorganized royal council and strengthened royal finances through taxes on land and salt, and created the first permanent royal army of France. The marriage of Louis XII and Anne of Brittany also added the territory of Brittany. Later, French King Francis I and Pope Leo X signed a treaty known as the Concordat of Bologna. The treaty approved the Pope's right to receive first year's income of new bishops and abbots in exchange for the right of the king to select bishop and abbot. Meanwhile, England saw a domineering aristocracy that caused violence at the local level. Fighting between the houses of York and Lancaster, also known as the War of the Roses, caused disorder that harmed trade, agriculture, and domestic industry. In 1471, Edward IV emerged victorious, and with the help of his brother, Richard II, and Henry VII of Tudor, they began to restore royal power and suppress the nobility. The Tudors avoided entering into costly wars, and thus ridding themselves of their financial dependence on Parliament. Henry VII's royal council consisted of a few great lords, smaller landowners, and urban residents. The court of the Star Chamber also kept the aristocracy in check by utilizing torture and secret sessions. By the 15th century, Spain remained a conglomerate of independent kingdoms. Castile and Aragon were the most powerful kingdoms, although the marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile did not immediately result in the political union of the Spanish people. Ferdinand and Isabella attempted to curb aristocratic power by excluding high nobles from the royal council and other government boards, recruited men trained in Roman law, thus elevating the power of the crown. Ferdinand and Isabella once again turned to the Jews as their scapegoat, and further asserted their power through the Inquisition. 40% of the Jewish population was killed, or became conversos, or new Christians. Conversos were often very wealthy. Eventually, purity of blood laws deemed any person with Jewish blood to be a Jew and unable to fully convert to Christianity. Spanish national state was defined by religious orthodoxy and the purity of blood.